Okay, this lesson is about using the properties of real numbers. We're going to be identifying them and then using them to simplify problems. So let's get started. Okay, the first property that I want you to know is the commutative property. And the way that I think about this is I think about what it means to commute. When you commute back and forth to work, that means you are driving to and from work each day. So if you think about it, on your way to work, for me to get to work this morning, I went past my neighbor's house, then I went past the stop sign, then I drove through Sugar Grove, then I went through the light there at the school, went past the fence into my parking spot. So on my way home from work tonight, I'm going to go past all of those exact same objects, but I'm going to go back past them in a different order. First, I'll pass the fence, then I'll go through the light, then I'll go through Sugar Grove, then I'll pass my neighbor's house, and then I'll be back home. So I still passed all of the same things, but the order changed. It's the same thing with the commutative property of addition. You have all of the exact same things included, but you've changed the order. So for example, if I have 2 plus 3, let's look at this. 2, I gotta figure out how to write on here, sorry. It's been a little while. Okay, so if I have 2 plus 3, that is the exact same thing as 3 plus 2. Either way I go, I still get 5 is equal to 5. This isn't writing very well. Let me go over here and write on the board. So 2 plus 3 is still equal to 3 plus 2. No matter what way I do it, I get the exact same answer. I'll have 5 is equal to 5. This isn't just true of addition, it is also true of multiplication. So if I have 2 times 3, that's the same thing as 3 times 2. I still get the same answer. Okay, the next property that I want you to think of is associative properties of addition and multiplication. All that's changing here is the grouping, and therefore it doesn't change the sum, it doesn't change the product, you're just changing who you are associating with. So for example, if I have 3 plus 2 in a group, and then I add 5, and then on this side I regroup it, so I have 3 by itself, and then I add 2 plus 5. Oops, that's a 3. 2 plus 5. So 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. Order of operation tells me on this side to do my parentheses first. I'm going to have 2 plus 5 first, which is 7. Then I bring down my 3. 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 is equal to 10. So the only thing that changed is the grouping of the symbols. Okay, the next property is pretty self-explanatory. It is the identity property. If somebody says to you, take out your picture ID, what's it a picture of? It's a picture of you. It identifies you as who you are. So the identity property means that I can either add something to it or multiply it by something and still have the exact same thing that I started with. So here, A plus 0 is equal to A. Any number that I add 0 to, if I add 0 to 3, I still have 3. If I add 0 to 1,000,000, I still have that 1,000,000. Doesn't change the identity of the problem. Same thing is true when I multiply by 1. 3 times 1 is 3. The identity of 3 has not changed. 1,000,000 times 1 is still 1,000,000. The zero property of multiplication just says that anytime I multiply a number by 0, I end up with 0. If I have 3 times 0, it's 0. If I have 1,000,000 times 0, it's 0. If I have 0 times me, it's 0. Multiplication property of -1 states that the product of -1 and any number is always going to be the opposite of the number that you started off with. So if I have 3, I multiply it by -1. I started off with 3 and I end with -3. I ended up with the opposite of what I started with. This is the multiplication property of -1. If I start with -2 and I multiply it by a -1, we know that a negative times a negative is a positive, so I end up with a positive 2. I started with a -2, I ended with a positive 2. So the multiplication property of -1 tells me that I end with the opposite of what I started with. So here I want you to name the properties that is illustrated. I would start off by, I always ask myself, I go back to those first two, I think they're the most confusing, the associative and the commutative. Remember, commutative property changes the order. The associative property changes the grouping. So looking at these, clearly I'm not changing the grouping or the order here because I end up with something totally different. So I know that this has to be one of these properties here, and of course it is the zero property of multiplication. Look at what we're doing. We're multiplying something by 0 and we're ending up with 0, so this is the zero property of multiplication. Oops, there we go. Okay, on this next one, look at what changed from this side of the equal sign over to this side of the equal sign. I still have all the same elements. They're still all in the same order, but from this side to this side, I changed the grouping. So I know when I change the grouping, it is the associative property. And since it's addition, not multiplication, I know it is the associative property of addition. Okay, and the very last one, I started with 10x, I ended with 10x. What I did was I added 0, so I know that this is the identity. And have the same identity, what I started with. The identity didn't change, so it's the identity property of addition. Okay, the next slide. A movie ticket costs $7.75 and a drink costs $2.40. Popcorn costs $1.25. What is the total cost for a ticket? The ticket's $7.75. For a drink, which is $2.40, and for the popcorn, which is $1.25. We know to get the total cost, we're going to add all of these together. Now, if we're using mental math here and we're not using a calculator, it's going to be kind of hard to do 75 cents plus 40 cents in our head and then add 25 more cents. It makes more sense, sense, to put the $1.25 by the $7.75, because then 75 and 25 we know adds up to a whole dollar. So that'll be a lot easier to do. So here I can do the 7 and the 8 make 9, plus that extra dollar made here by the change gives me $9, plus $2.40 is $11.40. So the property that I just used here was the commutative property. I changed the order in which they appear. I didn't regroup anything, I just changed the order. Okay, when we do these problems, a lot of times we do not write out all the steps, but mentally we do the steps in our head. So if I wanted to simplify this problem, I know that inside the parentheses I can't change anything. So instead I'm going to do the 5 times the 3, then multiply it by the n, getting 15n. This is an example of the associative property of multiplication because I changed the grouping. I first multiplied the 5 and the 3, then times it by n. And on this next problem, I would do both the associative and the commutative. I'm going to move the 8 to be beside the 4, and then I could group the 4 and the 8 together so that I have like terms together. So I have 12 plus 7b. So when I changed the order, that was the commutative property. When I regrouped, that was the associative property. And then this last one is a little bit tricky. There's several different ways that we could do this. The way I like to think of it is, we know that up here above the division symbol or the fraction bar, that this is a group. So I'm just going to regroup it. I'm going to write 6x times y times 1 over y. Same thing. So then I would regroup again and I would say, okay, this is the associative property of multiplication, y times 1 over y, and 6 times x, so I still have 6x. Y times 1 over y is just y over y. Anything over top of itself is 1, so I have 6x times 1, and we know that 6x times 1 is just 6x. So now let's identify the properties that I used here. When I regrouped, I kind of actually just rewrote the problem, but I still changed the grouping. So both of these steps I used the associative property. Then here I just multiplied. Then from here to here what I did was, once again I just calculated. I used the substitution property. I substituted 1 in place of y over y. And then we know finally 6x times 1 equals 6x. That is the identity property of multiplication. Okay, on your Chromebooks, if you go to Google Classroom, I did post an assignment for you to complete for homework. There are 19 questions. Please make sure you do that and bring those to me Tuesday morning.